The wind cut through the dusty street like a blade, carrying whispers that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Bad luck. Cursed. Look at her, came alone. The widow kept her eyes down, her fingers clutching the thin shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. It wasn't enough to keep out the cold, but it was all she had left. Just 3 weeks ago, she had been a wife. 3 weeks ago, she had a home. 3 weeks ago, she still believed the world had a place for her. Now, she stood in the middle of a frontier town that looked at her like she was something broken, something contagious. Her boots were worn through at the soles, her dress stained with dust from days of walking. Every step she had taken to reach this town had been filled with a single fragile hope, that someone, somewhere, would give her a chance to start again. But hope was a dangerous thing. It made the fall harder. "Please," she said softly, standing at the entrance of the general store. "I can work. I can cook, clean, anything." The shopkeeper didn't even look at her for long. His eyes flicked over her, taking in the signs of hardship, the emptiness where a husband should have stood beside her. "We don't need help," he muttered. "I won't ask for much," she tried again, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay steady. "Just a place to sleep. I'll earn it." A man lounging nearby let out a low chuckle. "You hear that? She thinks she's worth something." The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to sting. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't move. She couldn't afford to walk away. Not again. "I'm not asking for charity," she whispered. "No," the man replied, pushing himself off the wooden post and stepping closer. "You're asking people to ignore the truth." She finally looked up. "The truth?" she asked, her voice barely holding together. "That wherever you go," he said, circling her slowly, trouble follows. "Word travels fast out here. Your husband dies, your home gone, and now you show up alone." He shook his head. "That's not just bad luck. That's a warning." A few others nearby nodded, their silence louder than words. The widow felt something inside her crack. Not grief, she had already cried until there was nothing left. This was something colder. Something heavier. The realization that no matter how far she walked, she would always carry this shadow with her. "I just need a chance," she said, her voice breaking now despite her effort. The man smirked. "A chance? From who?" Before she could answer, he reached out, grabbing the edge of her shawl and tugging it slightly. "Let's see what exactly we'd be taking in." Enough. The word wasn't loud. But it didn't need to be. It cut through the moment like a sudden silence before a storm. The man froze. Slowly, the crowd turned. At the edge of the street, standing just beyond the line where dust met shadow, was a figure no one had noticed approaching. A tall, broad-shouldered Apache warrior. Shirtless despite the cold, his skin marked by the sun and the quiet strength of survival. Long black hair fell past his shoulders, adorned with simple tribal beads that moved softly in the wind. His presence was still, controlled, but there was something in his eyes that made even the boldest men hesitate. The grip on her shawl loosened instantly. The man stepped back, clearing his throat as if trying to recover what little pride he had left. "This doesn't concern you," he muttered. The Apache didn't respond right away. His gaze moved, not to the man, but to the widow. For the first time since arriving in this town, someone looked at her, not with judgment, not with suspicion, but with something she couldn't quite understand. Recognition. As if he saw her pain, and didn't turn away from it. Then, finally, he spoke. "You're done here," he said calmly. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. The man hesitated, glancing around for support, but found none. One by one, the others looked away. No one wanted to stand against the Apache. With a scoff that lacked its earlier confidence, he backed off. "Fine," he muttered. "She's your problem. The crowd slowly dispersed, the tension dissolving as quickly as it had formed. And just like that, she was alone again. Alone, except for him. The widow's hands trembled as she adjusted her shawl, unsure whether to speak or run. She had heard the stories. Everyone had. About men like him. Dangerous. Wild. Unpredictable. But nothing about this moment felt dangerous. It felt, still. He stepped closer, but not too close. Close enough to be heard. Far enough not to frighten her. "You have nowhere to go," he said, his voice steady. It wasn't a question. She swallowed, her throat tight. No. For a brief moment, silence passed between them. The wind whispered again, softer now. Then he said something she never expected to hear. "Come with me." Her heart skipped. "I don't want anything from you," he added, as if sensing her fear. "You need shelter." "I have it." She searched his face for deception, for cruelty, for anything that matched the stories she had been told. But she found none. Only quiet certainty. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a breath. He held her gaze. And for the first time, there was something deeper in his eyes. Not pity. Not desire. Something stronger. "Because no one stood for you," he said. "That ends now." The widow felt something unfamiliar stir inside her chest. Not hope. Not yet. But something close enough to make her hesitate, before finally taking a step toward the only man who hadn't turned her away. She didn't realize she had made her decision until the town was already behind them. The widow walked a few steps behind him at first, her fingers still clutched tightly around her shawl as if it were the only thing anchoring her to safety. The dusty road stretched ahead, fading into open land where the scattered buildings of the town gave way to silence. No one followed. No one called her back. It should have hurt more than it did. Instead, what she felt was something quieter, heavier. Relief. The Apache warrior moved with steady, unhurried steps, as though the land itself recognized him. He didn't look back to check if she was keeping up, yet somehow, she never felt lost. His presence guided her more than words ever could. For a long while, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath their feet and the distant cry of a hawk circling high above. She studied him carefully from behind. The stories had painted men like him as ruthless, men who took what they wanted and disappeared into the wild without a trace. But there was no arrogance in the way he walked. No impatience. No sign that he expected anything from her. If anything, he seemed careful. As if he were making sure not to frighten her. That realization unsettled her more than fear would have. "Why did you help me?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He didn't answer right away. His pace slowed slightly, and for a moment, she thought he might ignore her entirely. But then he spoke, his voice calm, carried easily by the open air. "You needed it." She frowned faintly. "That's not a reason." He glanced at her then, not fully turning, just enough for her to catch the edge of his expression. "It is to me." She fell quiet again, unsure how to respond. The simplicity of his answer left no room for argument, and yet it stirred something uneasy in her chest. She wasn't used to kindness without conditions. Not anymore. Not since everything had been taken from her. They walked for what felt like hours. The sun climbed higher, warming the earth beneath their feet, but the air still carried a sharp edge. Her legs ached, her steps growing slower despite her effort to hide it. He noticed. Of course he did. Without a word, he stopped. She nearly walked into him before catching herself. "What is it?" she asked cautiously. Instead of answering, he stepped off the path toward a cluster of rocks shaded by a lone tree. He motioned slightly with his hand. "Rest." "I'm fine," she said quickly, the words automatic. A lie. They both knew it. His gaze settled on her, not harsh, not accusing, just steady. "You're tired." It wasn't a question. The quiet certainty in his voice made something inside her give way. She exhaled softly, her shoulders sinking as the truth she had been holding back finally surfaced. "A little." He nodded once, as if that was enough. She moved to the shade, lowering herself onto the cool ground with more relief than she wanted to admit. For a moment, she simply sat there, eyes closed, letting the silence wrap around her. No shouting. No whispers. No judgment. Just the wind moving gently through the leaves above. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed he hadn't sat down. Instead, he stood a short distance away, facing outward, watching the land, not her. Guarding. The thought came uninvited, but it stayed. "You don't have to stand," she said quietly. "I do." The answer was immediate. She studied him again, more carefully this time. "You think someone followed us?" "No." "Then why?" "Because you're still afraid." Her breath caught. The words weren't sharp, but they landed with quiet precision. She looked down at her hands, noticing how tightly they were still clasped together. "I'm not afraid," she murmured, though the denial sounded weaker than she intended. He didn't argue. Didn't press. But after a moment, he spoke again, softer this time. "You don't trust what you don't understand." She lifted her gaze slowly. "And I don't understand you," she admitted. For the first time, something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but close. "You will." The certainty in those two words sent a strange warmth through her chest, unexpected and unfamiliar. "Where are we going?" she asked after a pause. "Home." The word echoed in her mind. Home. It felt distant. Fragile. Like something that no longer belonged to her. "And when we get there?" she asked carefully. He met her eyes fully now. "You'll have a place to stay," he said. "Food. Safety. And after that?" A flicker of something deeper passed through his gaze. "That depends on you." She searched his face, trying to find the hidden meaning behind his words, but there was none. No pressure. No demand. Just truth. For the first time in what felt like forever, the future didn't feel like a closed door. It felt uncertain. And somehow, that was better. The wind picked up again, softer now, carrying the scent of open land and something else she couldn't name. He turned slightly, stepping back onto the path. "Come," he said. This time, when she rose to follow him. She didn't stay behind. She walked beside him. And though the road ahead was still unknown, something had shifted between them, something quiet, fragile, but real. For the first time since she had lost everything. She wasn't walking alone. Part 3, The Home Beyond the Mountains. The widow expected a place of loneliness. She expected a cold shelter hidden deep in the wilderness, a place where she would feel like a stranger waiting for the day she could leave. But when she finally saw the Apache warrior's home, she stopped walking. Because it was nothing like the stories she had heard. The small wooden house sat beside a clear stream, surrounded by tall trees and wild grass moving gently in the breeze. Smoke rose from a stone chimney, carrying the scent of burning cedar into the afternoon air. There were stacks of firewood neatly arranged beside the house, a small garden near the back, and signs that someone had carefully built a life there. Not a life of violence. A life of peace. The widow looked from the home to the warrior standing beside her. "You built this?" He nodded. "All of it?" Another quiet nod. She looked again at the sturdy walls, the repaired roof, the small details that showed patience and care. The man everyone feared had created a place that felt safe. That confused her more than anything. She had spent years learning that people were exactly what others said they were. Cruel men stayed cruel. Selfish people stayed selfish. But this man did not fit the story. The Apache warrior opened the door and stepped aside. "You can sleep inside." She hesitated. "You mean, you won't?" He shook his head. "There is another room." Her eyes narrowed slightly, still cautious. "You don't expect anything from me?" The question hung between them. For a moment, his expression changed, not with anger, but with sadness. "No." The answer came quietly. "You have lost enough." Those words touched a wound she had tried desperately to hide. She turned away quickly, pretending to study the room. Inside, everything was simple but carefully kept. A wooden table. A fireplace. Blankets folded neatly. A few handmade tools hanging along the wall. There were no signs of a wealthy man. No signs of a powerful warrior. Only a man who had survived and built something with his own hands. He placed a small bag of food on the table. "Eat." She almost smiled at the command. Not because it was rude. Because it was the first time someone had cared enough to tell her what she needed. "I'm not helpless," she said softly. "I know." The answer surprised her. Most people looked at her and saw weakness. He looked at her and saw something else. "What do you see when you look at me?" she asked before she could stop herself. The warrior was silent for a long moment. Then he answered. "A woman who kept walking when many would have fallen." Her eyes lowered. Nobody had said that to her. Not once. After dinner, the sun disappeared behind the mountains, and darkness settled over the land. The widow sat near the fire, watching the flames dance. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't worried about where she would sleep. But peace also gave her something she had avoided. Time to remember. Her husband. Her old home. The day everything changed. She tried to hold the tears back. She had promised herself she would not cry anymore. But grief did not disappear just because someone became strong. One tear fell. Then another. She quickly wiped them away. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The warrior looked up from where he sat across the room. "For what?" "For bringing sadness into your home." His expression hardened slightly, not with anger, but with disbelief. "This is not sadness." She looked at him. "What is it then?" He looked toward the fire. "It is life." The simple answer broke something inside her. She had spent so long believing her pain made her a burden. But he spoke as if pain was simply something humans carried. Not something that made them unworthy. "I lost my family too," he said suddenly. The widow looked up. He rarely spoke about himself. "My people were taken from me," he continued. "My home changed. The world changed." His voice remained calm, but she heard the pain beneath it. "You understand?" He nodded slowly. "I understand losing the life you thought you would have." For the first time, she saw beyond the warrior. Beyond the strength. Beyond the stories. She saw a man who carried his own scars. "You hide it well," she whispered. "So do you." The room became quiet. But it was no longer an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of two people who finally understood they were not alone. Outside, the wind moved through the trees. Inside, two broken hearts sat beside the same fire. Neither knew what tomorrow would bring. Neither knew that this small moment would become the beginning of a new life. But that night, the widow finally slept peacefully. And the Apache warrior, who had spent years believing he was destined to walk alone, found himself listening to the sound of someone else breathing in his home. Not as a stranger. Not as a burden. But as someone who belonged there. The days that followed were unlike anything the widow had known. For the first time in months, she woke up without fear. There was no one shouting at her. No one reminding her of everything she had lost. No one looking at her like she was a problem that needed to be solved. Instead, each morning brought the same quiet routine. The sound of the fire being prepared. The smell of fresh coffee. The sight of the Apache warrior returning from the woods with firewood or food. He spoke little, but his actions said more than words ever could. When she struggled to carry a heavy bucket, he helped without making her feel weak. When she apologized for needing anything, he reminded her that accepting kindness was not the same as being helpless. Slowly, the walls she had built around her heart began to weaken. But one question remained. Who was this man? The town had described him as dangerous. A man without mercy. A warrior who belonged to the wilderness and had no place among ordinary people. Yet every day she saw something different. A man who repaired broken fences. A man who cared for injured animals. A man who placed food aside for the birds during winter. A man who had every reason to hate the world. But chose not to. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, she found him sitting outside near the fire. For once, he wasn't working. He was simply staring into the flames. She approached slowly. "May I ask you something?" He looked up. "Yes." "Why did you really help me?" The warrior remained silent. She expected him to avoid the question, just as he had avoided so many others. But this time, he didn't. "Because I knew what it felt like." She sat down across from him. "To be alone." He nodded. "To be judged before anyone knows your story." The word struck her. Because that was exactly what had happened to her. She had been judged by her past. By her loss. By circumstances she never chose. "I thought everyone in the world had decided what I was," she whispered. The warrior looked at her. "People fear what they don't understand. And they fear you." A faint sadness crossed his face. "Yes." The honesty surprised her. "You know they talk about you." "I know." "They call you dangerous." "I know." "Does it not hurt?" For a moment, the warrior said nothing. Then he looked toward the distant mountains. "When people only see your strength, they forget you have a heart." The widow felt those words deeply. Because she knew exactly what he meant. People saw her as a widow. A woman without a husband. A woman without protection. They never saw the person beneath the title. "What happened to your family?" she asked gently. The fire crackled between them. The warrior's eyes lowered. "My father taught me never to break a promise." His voice became quieter. "My mother taught me that strength means protecting those who cannot protect themselves." He paused. "Then one day, I lost both." The widow listened without interrupting. He told her about a life that had changed too quickly. About a home that no longer existed. About years spent wandering, carrying memories instead of possessions. "I thought being alone was easier," he admitted. She looked at him. "And was it?" A long silence followed. "No." The answer was almost a whisper. The widow looked down at her hands. Neither of them had planned this. Neither of them had expected to find someone who understood their pain. But somehow, two lonely people had found each other. "You saved me," she said. The warrior shook his head. "No." She frowned. "No. I only opened a door." The word stayed with her. Because she realized something important. He had not rescued her because he thought she was weak. He had offered her a choice because he believed she was strong enough to decide what came next. "You're different than what they say," she whispered. His eyes met hers. "So are you." A small smile appeared on her face, the first real smile he had seen since she arrived. The moment was brief. But it changed something. Later that night, as she prepared to sleep, she noticed something she had never seen before. A small wooden carving resting near the fireplace. It was shaped like a bird with its wings spread wide. She picked it up carefully. When the warrior entered, he stopped. For the first time, she saw surprise in his eyes. "What is this?" He looked at the carving. "My mother made it." The widow gently placed it back. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to touch something important." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something she never expected. "She would have wanted you to." The widow froze. Because those words meant something. This man, who trusted almost no one, was beginning to trust her. And she was beginning to realize that the greatest strength she had found in the wilderness was not the protection of a warrior. It was the kindness of a man who had every reason to close his heart, but chose to open it instead. For several weeks, the widow believed she had finally escaped the judgment of others. Beyond the mountains, away from the whispers and cruel faces, she had found something she thought she had lost forever. Peace. But peace does not always remain hidden. Especially when people begin to wonder why someone they rejected is no longer suffering. The first sign came when a rider appeared on the edge of the property. The Apache warrior noticed him before she did. He stood near the fence, watching silently. The widow stepped outside and immediately recognized the man. It was one of the townsmen. The same man who had laughed when she begged for work. The same man who had called her a burden. Her heart tightened. "What does he want?" she asked. The warrior's expression remained calm. "To speak." The rider approached slowly, looking less confident than he had before. "Widow," he called. She hated that word now. Not because it was untrue, but because people used it like it was her entire identity. She walked forward. "What do you need?" The man glanced toward the Apache warrior. For a moment, fear crossed his face. Then he cleared his throat. "The town heard you're living here." "I am." "And you're safe." She almost laughed. Safe. A word she hadn't heard in a long time. "Yes." The man shifted uncomfortably. "There are people who think you should come back." The widow stared at him. "Back?" "Yes. The town has changed." She looked at him carefully. Had it? Or did they only miss having someone to look down on? "Changed how?" she asked. The man struggled for an answer. No one had ever expected her to question them. They think you deserve another chance." Her eyes hardened slightly. "Another chance?" The words came out quieter than she expected. "I asked for a chance when I had nothing," she said. "I asked for work. For a place to sleep. For someone to believe I wasn't cursed." The man looked down. "And what did they give me?" Silence. "Nothing." The Apache warrior watched without speaking. This was her moment. Not his. The widow took a breath. "I don't need the town's permission to have a life." The rider looked surprised. "You've changed." She looked toward the small home behind her. "No. I remembered who I was." The man had no answer. After he left, the silence returned. But something felt different. The Apache warrior walked closer. "You could have gone back." She turned toward him. "Would you have wanted me to?" He looked away. That answer hurt more than words. "You think I belong there more than here?" "No." His response came quickly. She looked at him. "Then what?" The warrior took a slow breath. "I think you deserve to choose." The widow studied him. Even now, after everything they had shared, he still refused to decide her future for her. That was what made him different. He didn't want to own her. He wanted her to be free. Days passed, but the visit from the town changed something. Rumors spread. People began traveling to the edge of the mountains, hoping to see the widow who had disappeared with the feared Apache. Some came with curiosity. Some came with judgment. Others came because they could not understand how a woman they thought was broken had found happiness without them. Then one afternoon, several townspeople arrived together. The widow stepped outside and saw familiar faces. The same faces that had watched her suffer. The same faces that had remained silent. The town leader stepped forward. "We came to talk." The Apache warrior appeared behind her. Instantly, the visitors became nervous. But the widow raised her hand slightly. "No." Everyone looked at her. "This is my home. I will speak." The town leader hesitated. "We only want what is best for you." She shook her head. "No. You wanted what was easiest for you." The word surprised even herself. Months ago, she would have lowered her eyes. Months ago, she would have apologized for taking up space. But she was no longer that woman. "You looked at me and saw a widow," she continued. "He looked at me and saw a person." The group became silent. The Apache warrior looked at her, and for a brief moment, pride showed in his eyes. Not because she defended him. Because she had finally learned to defend herself. The town leader looked between them. "You choose this life." The widow looked at the home. At the land. At the man who had given her kindness when the world gave her rejection. Then she answered. "Yes." The word was simple. But it carried the weight of everything she had survived. That night, after everyone left, she sat beside the fire with the Apache warrior. "You're going to leave," she said suddenly. He looked at her. "Why would you think that?" "Because people bring trouble wherever you go." The warrior stared into the flames. "I have always been the reason people leave." Her heart tightened. She understood then. The strongest man she had ever met was still carrying the deepest fear. The fear that he was impossible to love. She reached toward the fire, her voice gentle. "Maybe you've been wrong." He looked at her. And in that quiet moment, both of them realized something. The battle ahead was not against the town. Not against rumors. Not against the world. The real battle was believing they were worthy of happiness. And for the first time, the morning after the town left was unusually quiet. The kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. The widow stood outside the small wooden house, watching the sunlight spread across the mountains. For the first time, she wasn't wondering where she would go next. She wasn't wondering if someone would turn her away. She wasn't wondering if she was unwanted. She was home. But there was one thing she could not ignore. The Apache warrior had become distant. Not cold. Not cruel. Just quiet. The same silence that had once protected him was now pulling him away. She found him near the edge of the woods, repairing a broken fence. "You're leaving." It wasn't a question. His hands stopped moving. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked at her. "Why do you think that?" "Because I know that look." His expression changed slightly. "What look?" "The look of someone preparing to disappear before anyone can ask them to stay." The warrior looked away. The widow stepped closer. "When the town came, you thought you were the problem." He remained silent. "You thought if you left, everyone would be happier." Still no answer. But she knew she was right. "You saved me from a place where nobody wanted me," she said softly. "But you still believe nobody could want you." The warrior lowered his eyes. For the first time, she saw something beneath all his strength. Fear. Not fear of enemies. Not fear of danger. Fear of belonging. "I have lived my whole life knowing people leave," he finally said. His voice was quieter than she had ever heard. "Some were taken from me. Some chose to go. After a while, you stop hoping anyone will stay." The widow felt the weight of those words. Because she knew that pain. She had lost her husband. Her home. Her place in the world. They were different stories. But the same loneliness. You gave me a home when I had nothing, she said. The warrior looked at her. You gave me something I thought I would never have again. What? She smiled gently. A reason to believe tomorrow could be better. The wind moved through the trees around them. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then the warrior looked toward the mountains. I never wanted you to feel trapped here. The widow shook her head. I was trapped before I came here. She looked back at the house. Here, I found freedom. Those words reached him. Because that was what he had always wanted for her. Not possession. Not control. Freedom. The warrior took a slow breath. You could still leave. She smiled faintly. So could you. He looked surprised. You could walk away today, she continued. You could return to the mountains and convince yourself you are meant to be alone. A small sadness appeared in his eyes. But you would still be running. The truth of her words settled between them. For years, he had believed strength meant carrying everything alone. But perhaps true strength was allowing someone to stand beside him. Not behind him. Not beneath him. Beside him. Months passed. The small home near the mountains changed. The garden grew larger. The empty rooms became warmer. The silence that once filled the house was replaced with laughter, conversation, and the sounds of a life being rebuilt. The widow learned the land. The Apache warrior learned that he didn't have to hide every wound. Together, they built something neither of them thought they would find. A family. A home. A future. The people in town slowly began to see the truth. The man they feared was the same man who had helped strangers. The man they called dangerous was the man who protected those who had no one. And the woman they had rejected was the woman who had found the courage to choose her own path. Years later, travelers would pass through the region and hear stories about the couple who lived beyond the mountains. Some would talk about the powerful Apache warrior. Some would talk about the widow who stood beside him. But those who truly knew them understood something deeper. Their story was never about a warrior saving a helpless woman. It was about two people who had been broken by loss. And found strength in each other. One evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, the widow sat beside the fire. The Apache warrior joined her quietly. She looked at him and smiled. Do you remember the first day we met? He nodded. You were afraid. She laughed softly. I was. And now? She looked around at the home they had built. At the land. At the man beside her. Now I know the difference between being alone and being free. The warrior smiled. A rare smile. The kind she had learned to treasure. Because the man everyone believed had no heart. Had simply been waiting for someone who could see it. And the widow who thought she had lost everything. Had found the one thing she never expected. A place to belong.